and Eladia spoke, and then so.
I think you can just say the name and then the other name.
Okay. For a bit then?
Yes, yeah, sure. Yeah. And just a second. Okay, so now clicker will work. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. It's just that quick file.
1 2 1 2 1 2 test.
Heather will validate you. Was that it?
This is extremely heavy and tiny.
I mean, I was thinking, I've got it right here. Like, just put it right here. Or it's right here.
No,
No.
I'm sure it can, but it's a touch screen, but it's not letting me. Yeah, it's because it's brand new. I haven't set anything up. So it's very confusing. Here's my.
Appreciate it.
Can everyone hear me okay? It's quiet. Can everyone hear me at the back there? Yeah? Okay, we're just about to get started. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to our DAS Lecture Series event tonight, and welcome to everyone in person and joining us on the live stream. So my name is Terry Peters. I'll be your host for the evening. I'm the co-chair of the Department of Architectural Science Lecture Committee this year, along with Will Galloway sitting at the front there. And this lecture is a collaboration with BEAT. So our DAS lecture series is sponsored by Esri, Thames Valley Brick and Tile, Diamond Schmidt Architects, and the Ontario Association of Architects. So we thank them for their support. And I'll just give you a brief overview of tonight's event. So our speaker will give a lecture for about 50 to 60 minutes. And so please save your questions until the end. There will be time for a Q&A at the end of the talk. And for the Q&A part after the lecture, we'll be passing around a microphone together with one of our student committee members. So please keep in mind that after the talk, stick around for the Q&A. We'll be just 20 minutes. So we want to minimize the disruption of people moving out during the Q&A. Before we go any further, I'd like to share our land acknowledgement, and we will hear from BEAT in just a minute or two. So I would like to share our land acknowledgement. Toronto Metropolitan University sits on lands now known as Toronto that have been inhabited for millennia by many Indigenous nations and peoples. It is our tradition to begin our meeting with a land acknowledgement, which not only recognizes the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples in this area, but is also a reminder that we are all accountable to those relationships. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect this land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And it is in that spirit that and on behalf of our university, that I welcome you all to TMU and to our department and to this event. To put this evening's discussion into a bit of context, our lecture series is designed as a learning opportunity for students and to connect to the larger architecture community of professionals and other people that come to our lectures in our building. So it allows us to extend what we're learning in the classroom into real world context and add some flavor to the ideas and topics that we're discussing in studio and in research and classes. And this topic this year, we're really looking at this theme of the public city and thinking about how we design for the public in the process and in the product of architecture. So it's a good time to reevaluate what we value in terms of public space. And there are a lot of ways to think about the subjects and the speakers that are involved in this lecture series and how we think about our role in the city. So I'm going to hand over to BEAT. Heather is going to just give an introduction to their network, and I'll pass it over here.
Thanks, Terry. I have them on here, but they're small. So welcome everyone to tonight's BEAT and TMU talk. I'm Heather Doubledam. I'm the chair of the advisory committee for BEAT. Jennifer Esposito was supposed to be here tonight. She's coming later. She's the chair of the executive committee, so you might want to say hi to her as well. So BEAT is a volunteer-run organization made up of architects, designers, leaders, and entrepreneurs, creating opportunities for community building, advocacy, networking, and mentorship. We believe, oh, and by the way, BEAT stands for Building Equality in Architecture Toronto. We believe that empowering women in the design community improves and enriches the practice of architecture, the quality of the built environment, and ultimately the human experience. We are committed to creating lasting, systemic, and transformational change with purpose-driven action, openness, compassion, and a respect for diverse perspectives. So BEA currently includes chapters across Canada, BEAT in Toronto, in Northern Canada, we're BEA North, Atlantic Canada, and the prairies. We host all different kinds of talks, including, all kinds of events, including talks, workshops, mixes, dinners, forums, seminars, and parties. We have a party coming up next year if anyone's interested. Our talks are designed to showcase the work of local architectural professionals. And for anyone here who needs Con Ed points, this talk qualifies you for 1 OAA structured learning hour. So please stay to the end of the presentation to receive your certificate. There'll be a sign up form outside, just outside on the table if you want to just jot down your name and email address and everything. Oh, Paul's got it. So anyone else who needs that paper, please fill that out. And then all the certificates will be emailed to the participants in December. And if you want to sign up for our mailing list for other events to receive notifications, go to the BEAT Toronto website. There's Jennifer, she made it. But we want to, on behalf of BEAT, we want to thank you all for joining us tonight and participating in the event. And I'm going to turn it over to Terry to introduce tonight's speaker.
Okay, so one of the student members of our committee, Jessica, will introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jessica. Tonight we'll have Keishi Gabawik, Eladia Smoke, speaking with us tonight. She is Anishinaabe from Abishkakang Lac Seul First Nation with family roots in Alderville First Nation, Winnipeg, and Toronto. Eladia has worked in architecture since 2002 and founded Smoke Architecture as a principal architect in 2014. She is the first Anishinaabe architect in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, and is the third Indigenous woman licensed as an architect in Canada. Eladia is very active in the architecture community in Canada. From 2016 to 2022, she taught as a master lecturer at Laurentian's MacEwan School of Architecture. She serves as a founding member of RAIC's Indigenous Task Force. And in 2018, Eladia represented Canada at the Venice Biennale Unseated exhibition as part of an international team of Indigenous architects and designers. Current professional work includes community-based and institutional projects, working alongside Indigenous stakeholders, collaborating with First Nation communities, and listening closely to our elders. We're very thankful to have Eladia here with us tonight, and we look forward to learning about your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I got my own. Bonjour, Ani Sego, Kejigabawik Indijnakas, Obishikakang and Donjaba, Wabishki Mayingan and Dodem. So I'm Eladia Smoke, and my Anishinaabe name means she's fast. So I should probably set a little timer for myself to make sure I'm not going too fast. And to be rebellious, I'm just going to say if you do want to ask questions, I actually very much welcome interruptions. I know we're live, so the questions I'll have to repeat, and that's fine. But if you do feel like interrupting, raise your hand, and I will gladly take questions, because I like these things to feel like discussions more than, you know, overlaying information upon you. So yeah, feel free to interject. And some of the other things I shared in my little intro there, I'm from White Wolf Clan, and that's a subset of Bear, which is sort of healing, protection, area of governance or responsibility. And my home community, Lac Seul First Nation, is way up near Sioux Lookout. However, I also, as Jessica shared, also have family on my dad's side in Alderville First Nation, and on my mom's side in Winnipeg and Toronto. So, you know, feel pretty rooted here as well as in the Boreal, which I just was really pleased to visit. It's a long trip, but boy, it sure was nice. So thanks so much for Toronto Metropolitan University and BEAT for inviting me here. I think the work that both organizations are doing is really wonderful, and it's wonderful to see the diversity in the students who are here. Just want to say that I'm so proud to see you here in all of your glorious diversity, because what Heather said is really true, that the practice of architecture desperately needs diversity to retain relevancy and to create rich and layered environments that we'll all enjoy. So keep with it. It is a tough profession to enter. It's a great deal of work to get through school. And then you have your internship and your registration exams and logging all your hours. So it's a long road, but it's a really wonderful one. And I have never had the same day twice. It's always something new. And it's a great deal of working together with people, which I really value. So I'm going to start out talking about how we could create public space with a really strong role for the public. And I think that is really key, because when we want to invite diversity into architecture, we want to have public space we all share, that reflects all of us, that we can all see ourselves in that space, we feel welcomed, and that the activities that we value are encouraged. Because architectural space manifests what humans believe our place in the world to be physically. It also kind of defines what it is possible to imagine ourselves to be. And it defines and somewhat curtails the types of activities that is possible to do in that space. So our responsibility is a very large one, because we're simultaneously saying, this is what we believe, and we're also saying, this is what is possible. So making spaces that reflect what we believe and what is possible for multiple types of people is tremendously important. So I'll start out talking a little bit about that. Oh, I probably killed this little clicker already. Yeah, it's dead. Darn. Ah, good. Alive again. Okay, one important aspect of diversity, over and beyond representation, is acknowledging the history of the place where we work. So here in Canada and in North America and many places in the globe, we live in colonial environments. So here in Canada, we're trying to reconcile that. Our view of ourselves as Canadians is one that we're very welcoming, we're very inclusive, we're very tolerant, and yet we have this legacy of highly colonial oppressive policies that we all deal with on an everyday basis. In an effort to address that situation, Canada has adopted into the federal mandate the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP. And under UNDRIP, they have also decided that for any federal projects that are being undertaken, there's going to be a 5% minimum Indigenous participation plan. So 5% of any federally funded projects are going to include 5% of Indigenous content. So we find that a lot of clients are requesting Indigenous perspectives, even in mainstream spaces. However, Indigenous peoples only represent 1%, less than 1% of licensed. Actually, we'd kind of be happy about 1%. We're still less than 1% of practitioners in Canada. So how do we undertake an architecture that adds that richness we talked about to our shared environments? How do we avoid exploitative relationships, tokenism, and cultural appropriation? Now, I just want to have a show of hands. Who saw my OAA Sudbury talk this year about including Indigenous voices in architecture? Did anybody see that? Okay, you, sir, I apologize. Some of the slides will be duplicates. I promise you, however, not all of them will be. There will be new content in here as well. So, okay. Sorry. So there is no Indigenous unity. This is sort of a fallacy that we often run into, that we're sort of a cohesive group. We all share very similar principles, ways of doing things. This is not true. There's huge diversity. I think over 200 languages are spoken on this in Canada alone. And it's we have very diverse goals and priorities, and we are diverse nations. So there's nobody you could go to that could offer you like a coherent Indigenous perspective. There are certainly themes that we share, I think, but there's no sort of Indigenous community to go and ask questions of. So what we want to do instead is to approach our local Indigenous communities, see what they've got on the go, and try to see if the projects that we undertake can help move those goals forward. So really looking for parallels with Indigenous peoples' own goals. Oh, and some of these slides you'll see, these are the wonderful women in my firm. We're about half Indigenous operated and 100% Indigenous owned. And it's a real joy to come into work every day and work with these fantastic women. So that's why I put them up here, so you could see the diversity that we've been able to achieve in our firm. So as we are ourselves as Indigenous peoples, reclaiming our cultures, our teachings, our heritage, all we can really do is augment partnering practitioners' already established foundational knowledge that they've built for themselves, because it becomes quite exhausting if there's no foundational knowledge whatsoever. And this is a challenge for practitioners who have not, come up through training with any kind of Indigenous content in their curricula, because there still is very little in the architectural precedents that reflects Indigenous spatial configurations, values, and other teachings. So it is really challenging to build that foundational knowledge, but it is totally possible to do so. So if you are in need of Indigenous 101, perhaps don't invite your participants to train you, your participants in public engagements, your participants in the design team. Try to see if you can do your own research at the beginning. And I have some book recommendations at the end that will help everyone do that. There are some really good resources, and there are also some Indigenous consultants out there who will do cultural fluency sessions with your firm. So when you get out into practice, just be aware that it really gets us all farther forward on the page if we can build that foundational knowledge of the Indigenous nations in the territories that your projects are going to sit. So yeah, seek out those external sources. Indigenous peoples do experience intergenerational impacts of colonization. We have really sound and successful coping techniques to deal with these dynamics. These include really strong support networks. So we focus a lot on family connections, our community connections, and we also want to reconnect with our ancestral lifeways. Many of us have also been deliberately cut off from all of these things. So many Indigenous people you may meet are themselves on a journey of discovery. So just keep that in mind. What will help us is by creating public space that encourages and invites our cultural activities into the public sphere, that those start to become a default position for our public spaces. So in Toronto, as an example, City of Toronto has now recognized that a sacred fire is really crucial for many of our ceremonies, and is really smoothing the way for us to create spaces that include open fires under the expert guidance of an Indigenous fire keeper. It's like a 2-year apprenticeship minimum, usually a decade in apprenticeship to become a fire keeper. So we're very careful about it. And this is a way that our municipalities are starting to see, yes, this is something we could share a public space with. So I think in our work, it's important to support our colonization and coping strategies with public spaces that encourage Indigenous cultural events. I've included this image because I find it really inspiring. Patricia Ningwats there in the red sweater. She's from my home community. She wrote Talking Gookum's Language, which is a book of Anishinaabemowin. And she's from my home community. She's you can see her here with her family members and friends in a bentwood lodge. So bentwood is one of the key architectural typologies of this region. We use little whippy pieces of wood, pre-tension them to introduce strength into the member, and then knit those together where they dry in develop rigidity. So this teaching lodge creates an ephemeral interface between gatherings of people, humans, and the land that surrounds them, the natural systems. And we do this because the land is our greatest teacher. So when we teach in a space like this, we are constantly reminded we just have a little enclave and the wide world around us is really what we depend on. So I find this space very inspiring. You can see we're sharing traditional foods that have been prepared, over an open fire. So I love this image because it's sort of like, yes, this is sort of what's missing from our public spaces right now. How do we respect our Indigenous partners that we're bringing into our projects as we undertake design? I love this image because this is me sitting down with Dialogue's Craig Applegath just before we embarked on the design process for Centennial College's A building expansion. And I thought it was such a wonderful way of starting because I brought my little birch bark basket and we smudged out in the CBC courtyard way in downtown Toronto. And it was really nice because that courtyard is really hardscape. Like it's a lot of pavement, but like we were able to go down there and smudge together. And I thought it was just a really nice way of starting things off. I'd like to note that North America does not have a cohesive platform to share decision-making on public space and the use of lands with Indigenous peoples. Therefore, all of our collaborative endeavors are ad hoc, and this puts a huge burden on us as designers because we kind of have to start from scratch every time, and we keep having to rebuild the wheel. Okay, so what partnerships can we pursue? Who can we talk to? Who will be willing to come and work with us on this important project? And this is as a result of the fact that Indigenous peoples have been largely excluded from the decision-making process for generations now. So we just don't have a cohesive platform. So what we need in the short term, and perhaps some of you will get public jobs, who knows, some of you might eventually run for office. So one thing to note, we need this. We need a comprehensive strategy for mutually beneficial capital expenditure. So how we spend the money. We need a comprehensive strategy for land development and habitat restoration. This is really key. I'm sure you've got a lot of this in your education. How do we build regenerative environments together? And the people who have been doing a lot of that work in the background where nobody can see it is First Nations people. We hold a great deal of the land base of this country, and we have been taking our duties of stewardship extremely seriously. You see this in British Columbia, you've seen it at Kanawake, you've seen it in all the pipeline developments, the water warriors. How do we develop a comprehensive strategy for built environments that support Indigenous cultural production? So by cultural production, I mean getting together and doing things that reflect our cultures and move them forward. Because these critical elements are not yet in place, we do encounter fragmented design gestures, and we do encounter a great deal of engagement fatigue on potential Indigenous participants. So in my last time when I presented this particular slide, one of our audience members brought forward, I've approached the building department, the public works department for this First Nation that my project is in their traditional lands, and they just don't get back to me. And this is true. Our Indigenous First Nation leadership are overwhelmed. There's usually about 5 of them per nation-ish, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And they wear a million hats. They're trying to run educational programs. They're trying to run housing. They're trying to lead the people in different, they're begging for funding for things. They're trying to run their water systems. And, when we call them up, it's like, okay, well, this is one more thing. I don't see a direct benefit. It can wait. So this is one thing that we do encounter. So that's why I said at the beginning, seek parallels. So try to figure out what that First Nation, what their priorities are. So what have they got on the go? Are they championing, say, a forestry stewardship initiative? Is there anything your project could do to support that? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes, well, maybe it's the next project. But seeking out and finding those parallels is really, really crucial, even if it's on an ad hoc level at this stage. Our zero is always who speaks for this territory. So figure out what nations have a say in what happens in the territory your project's going to be located in. What capacity do those potential participants have to support this project and involve themselves? It could be very minimal. It could be that they only have a little bit of time to offer. Figure out what that is. And very crucially, what will their impact be? What are we envisioning asking them? And what are we envisioning implementing once we hear the answer? Because those questions and our answers to them are really critical for the integrity of our process. So we need to build our engagement tools with an eye to scope. So what can the project actually do? This will define what sorts of questions we can ask, and make sure that we're not asking things we can't act on. So we want to involve participant representatives and key decision makers in establishing those points for discussion. So if you're working on a project and it's a public project and you have a public voice on the project, you definitely want to run your questions by the project leadership before you ever ask them, because we need buy-in from the people holding the purse strings so that what we hear actually gets implemented. Too many times, Indigenous peoples have been asked questions and then the answers are just ignored. And this has resulted in a lack of trust and engagement fatigue, because if you keep getting asked questions and then your answers never matter, you don't want to really answer any more questions anymore. So ask participant representatives to review the questions with you as well, to make sure that the questions are relevant to them and that the formats and tools you're using are going to work for them as well, that these are things that they think they can do and will be useful to them. Now we do our listening. We want to make sure that those project decision makers are there in the room listening to those answers, because if we're acting as mediator, as a designer, our voice doesn't have as much weight as if we are letting people speak for themselves. Now, I'm just going to note, and I probably should have noted this at the beginning, this goes for not just Indigenous people, but like any people you want to engage with. This process is very valid for any kind of public engagement process you undertake. We've used it time and time again, and time it has proved itself very useful. So if you're that spokesperson, your voice is going to have a whole lot more weight if you've done a really good job recording exactly what people say. So collaboratively establish a strategic plan for participants' continued involvement. So by this, I mean, everybody's kind of strapped for time, and our participants are no different. So they probably want to get an update on where all of their contributions went, but they probably don't want to spend a whole ton more time with you, as charming as you all may be. So ask them how they'd like to stay involved. Is this a website update? Is this an email that you send out to participants? Is this another presentation that they're able to attend? What is their choice for staying involved? Finally, consolidate your results. So this is not finally, this is the second finally. Penultimately, compile your results. So check directives for accuracy and completeness. So if you can do this back with the participants, awesome. That's great that they have the time to offer to do that with you. But at the very least, make sure that you're checking back and making sure that all the key stuff got back in. Even if you have like 1 or 2 participant representatives to come and do this with you, even that is helpful if it's not the whole crew. This will let you know that you as an architect speaking architect language have understood everybody else speaking everybody else language. Because in architecture school, we're actually trained in a whole bunch of terms that nobody else knows. And then we start just speaking that naturally and forget we're doing it. So, and then when we hear stuff from other people, they'll be saying things and we're like, okay, so that means I think this. So in the translation, there can be some misses. So checking back with your crew, your participant crew, or at least representatives from your participants is super helpful. And just reconfirm with your project decision makers, whoever's holding the purse strings on your project, that in fact, they are still committed to implementing what is heard. This is important because later, when budgets hit, things change. And it's important to only change the things that are sort of don't compromise project success. So the key project success factors is what we're after. And we want people to make a commitment to implementing them. Finally, implement them. So update your action on the directives at each key project milestone. So we always present at the end of schematic design, we present at the end of design development, and we present sometimes 3 times during contract docs when we're doing the technical drawing production. So at each key milestone presentation, make sure you haul out those key project success factors everybody agreed on and review them with everyone. Say, okay, so as we had previously agreed, these are the things we've got to do. And then say, here's how we're doing them. This is how we've integrated them into the design gestures that we're using. So this maintains transparency and accountability for everyone, including the people who are handling the budget, perhaps most importantly, because that budget, it'll start paring things down. So we don't want key success things pared down. How are we going to integrate Indigenous members into a project team? And how are these contributions going to emerge spatially? So this is the clincher. How do we take what we heard and make it in the architecture? First, I would say it's very important to make sure that your partners are solid. So when I said before, step 0 is to figure out who speaks for the territory. This is part of step 0, actually. So assessing Indigenous partners has become a little bit more complex because we've had some instances of people claiming to speak for Indigenous people and then not actually being Indigenous. And that is very disappointing for all concerned, and we want to avoid it. So some things to look out for when you are seeking Indigenous partners for your work. Is their entity, firm, nonprofit, NGO, whatever, is it Indigenous operated and owned? So this is kind of a big determining factor if they're sort of have a valid voice, right? Do personnel acknowledge their connection to a specific Indigenous nation? So as I said, I'm from Obishkekang and my dad's family is from Alderville. So like, I say that every time. And actually that's part of the formal intro for most Indigenous people. So Anishinaabeg people always share that. So you kind of know, here's where I'm coming from. This is who I am. And if you're noticing that people aren't ascribing affiliation with a particular nation, you kind of got to be a little suspicious because, like, where are they from? Where are they coming from? Who do they represent? Is the firm or personnel or the entity that you're dealing with, is it appropriate to the region? Now, there are very few Indigenous architects, but there are other Indigenous entities out there you can approach. It is really a lot better if you can manage to get one that's regionally appropriate. It's going to be really hard in Eastern Canada. Probably that's going to be Indigenous consultants or artists because there aren't any architects east of Quebec. So, and I'm the only one in Quebec. So it's tough. Match the spectrum of the expertise to the scope of work. So if you are undertaking an architectural project and there is architectural design to be done, perhaps you need an Indigenous architect. However, if you are doing some other endeavor, maybe an Indigenous consultant or artist would be perfectly appropriate. So that's a decision you've got to make. What kind of project scope is there? Who's best to do that scope? Okay, I think this is funny. I'm never going to laugh from it, so maybe it's a bad joke. But Walking Eagle News, if you've never checked it out, you totally should. It's hilarious. Wrote this article, Feds unveil a reasonably sized checkmark to honor Indigenous commitments. So how do we assess a project? So when we're undertaking, say, a public space project, there's a few things we want to look for in the project documentation to see what kind of a commitment there is to Indigenous content. So is this a box ticking exercise? Are we just saying, oh, we want Indigenous stuff, but we don't really know what that is, nor do we really care. So that the telltale signs of that is vague parameters. They haven't really said what they want. Minimal descriptions in the RP. The request for proposals for anyone who doesn't know what that is. So the thing to commission the work. Unclear scope of work and unclear objectives. So if you encounter all of those things, it could be a box ticking exercise. Be aware of that when you're undertaking your design work, because it'll determine what you can do and what you can't. Sometimes it's still possible to push for further inclusivity with the client. For example, one thing you could always do, even if they're not asking for Indigenous content, is you could create a database of potential Indigenous suppliers. So you could also endeavor to smooth procurement processes so that emerging vendors can also participate in the capital expenditures of the project. So I hope what I'm saying is making sense. Are those words making sense? Can you raise your hand if they make sense to you? Ah, good. Okay. I wasn't sure. I've been speaking architect for an awful long time. And sure. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Organizations writing RFPs to ensure the parameters aren't fit.
Last question again. Sorry, it's more of a technical. I was just wondering, you know, if you're assessing an RFP and there are vague parameters, are there professional advisors who may assist government or other organizations in putting together the information in an RFP in the first place?
I am so glad you're asking, because I am founding a business to do that. I'm going to work with my sister and an engineer to see if we can offer some project management services, because honestly, it's very rare. There are Indigenous consultants out there who I think have attempted to do just that, because we know it's a gap. But of course, it's a lot of paper pushing and like bringing purse string holders and so forth together and getting everybody on board. And it is tough. One great example I found of this was Centennial College brought Turo onto their compliance team for their so that their owner's scope of their owner's statement of requirements was implemented properly. So Turo had a little bit of a hand doing that. Also, Centennial College did some preliminary internal engagement with their Indigenous faculty and staff to integrate their perspectives. So that was written into the RFP, and it helped immensely. Like, we had something to respond to then, and then like a responsive response back. So it was really good. And it's great when it works out. Still pretty thin on the ground though. So yeah. Okay, so we can always advocate as professionals for a basic level of engagement with Indigenous nations. However, we should really only do this if there is a commitment to implement the results. It's great to have intentions, but it's crucial to have results. So if there's no clear path to implementation, you know what? Find an artist perhaps, or something that you can just add easily after. And I hate to say that, but Indigenous artists can add a lot of depth. Like they work in super challenging environments, scenarios, and they pull it off. So sometimes that's the answer if there's a very low commitment level. Again, everything I'm saying actually applies to any sort of diversity implementation you're seeking to do. Like, I'm saying Indigenous, but it actually goes for any community that is not well represented in the built environment. So just keep that in mind when I'm talking. Oh, have I killed the clicker again? Oh, there we go. Okay, so what we are seeking to do is to build reciprocal relationships with Indigenous participants and practitioners to get the best result for the project. When I say reciprocal, I mean mutually beneficial. The participants are having a benefit. They're seeing something emerge from their contributions to the project. Same with the Indigenous professionals we invite. There always has to be a back and forth, a synergy between the project needs and the partnering or participant needs. One thing to avoid is late involvement. So this is something I run into. A client will, trundle down the road of getting their project done. They've got the funding, they've got the RFP out. Oh, good, yeah, we got schematic design done. Excellent. All the milestones are being hit, and then they're like, wait, oh man, it would be so nice to get some Indigenous perspectives on this. And then we get the call, and we're like, eesh, I don't know. There's not a whole lot of a way in at this point. A lot of Indigenous participants or professionals don't have a lot of way in after schematic because so many decisions have already been made. So this is a tough situation because you want to have the representation in the project. You want to create those spaces we can all use together. We want to have the richness of design that Indigenous perspectives offer. But it's just so tough after so many decisions have been made. So we've just started saying no. But at this late phase, it could be that Indigenous consultants could help do a couple of things at any rate in procurement, right? In procurement and implementation, maybe you can hire some Indigenous folks to at least come do the work. Indigenous artists can also sometimes work in pretty challenging scenarios to bring a lot of depth to our shared spaces. So meaningful engagement and integrated Indigenous personnel and a commitment to implementing this expertise does enrich architecture for everyone. I really strongly believe that the teachings our ancestors have so carefully protected and kept alive against all odds for several generations of severe, nearly apocalyptic oppression. Those teachings are alive for a reason. They're here to help us all out. And we need to keep them alive and strengthen them in our work. So I really do believe that that meaning is deep in the character of Canada. We just haven't seen it physically. So once we start seeing it physically, I think we will see an explosion of reinforced Canadian identity. So I just think it's so important. Indigenous involvement is most effective the earlier you do it. So if you could do it when you're just thinking about the funding for a project, if you could do it before you issue the RFP for services, if you could do it before schematic design is done, that would be awesome. After schematic, it becomes kind of hard. This is an example of a project at Algoma University, Makwawake again. So this is an Indigenous Sharing and Learning Center. Algoma University anticipates this will be a hub for Indigenous knowledge sharing in the Great Lakes region and beyond. So this was a very exciting idea that we came up with prior to speaking with anyone or listening to them because it was a competition submission. Those are always tough because you kind of make your best guess at what might be needed based on what other clients have told you and all your teachings that you've received so far. And this was a bad guess because when they looked at this rooftop weaving pathway that was going to be student touchdown space and learning space, they're like, there's no way we'd ever use that. It's just going to cover with snow and ice and everybody's going to slip and fall and die. And also, there's no way we're clearing snow off of that. Nope, we just don't have this. I'm like, oh, that's out then. So that's a great example of what happens, the sort of wonderful design thinking that happens before ever listening to anyone. And we kind of didn't have a choice because that's how they ran their procurement, was with a competition where we weren't allowed to speak with anyone. So anywho, however, we did come up with a few ideas that did have traction. This was one of the key ones, and we took it directly out of the internal engagement work that they had provided us as part of the RFP package. It was a really solid document, didn't say anything about accessible roofs, sadly, but what it did say is that this is going to be a healing space that's going to protect our young people. And there's that bear there, Makwa, who is a healer protector. And that bear is on a mission. And so we thought, okay, so the form of the building, the silhouette of the building, and the whole ethos of the building is going to be based on Makwa, traveling north in the direction of shared knowledge and wisdom. So north is associated with the direction of elder, and it's associated with the direction of sort of intellectual knowledge transfer. And interestingly, the entire campus, the whole rest of Algoma University, is north. So we thought, wouldn't it be nice to be able to get up on Makwa's shoulders and see the lake that's that Sault Ste. Marie enfolds, and look behind you and see north the rest of Algoma University campus, where all this really good work is being done by academics and students, and sort of get that extra perspective. Because right now, Algoma University is characterized by the big, ugly shoulders of this Shingwak Hall. Shingwak Hall is a former residential school, and there are many survivors who are pulled out of their families and really brutalized in that facility. And that's the face of Algoma University, which is why they're doing this building. So we thought this building really has to overcome that history without obscuring it. So by getting up on Makwa's shoulders, we get that additional perspective. And that perspective indicates that we can weave together 21 strand sweet grass braids. So this is a teaching that one of our summer students came and shared with us from her home community of Achapoes Cree Nation. And she said the present is a weave of 3 sweet grass braids. There's the future, the hopes we all have for what will be accomplished when we come to the age of our grandchildren of the future. And so that's represented on the east, the direction of new beginnings, that direction of sunrise, new initiatives. And so in that direction, there is some forest. There's still the tree line sits there. And we're developing, they have a ceremonial gazebo here. It's not a gazebo, they call it the arbor. And their sacred fire sits in there. In fact, the very first experience we ever had on site here was coming in, and they had a sacred fire going, and we just went in and sat. And it turned out to be they were doing ceremony to select the winning team for the project. So that worked out well. But it actually really helped ground us because it was a super heavy competition submission. We were like wrestling with all these emotions, and like, it was really heavy. And so we desperately needed that fire to sort of like reground and center us. So thank goodness for that. And so there's going to be an outdoor classroom here as well. So this is that Eastern new beginnings, connecting to the idea of what we want our future to be. Then there's the braid of the present, the needs of the present, which is that braid that knits together the past and the future. So that's the building itself. What we need to do right now to get to that future we want to see. And then finally, a reconciliation and an honesty about the past. So the third sweetgrass braid is the past, and going even farther behind that, even farther back, the teachings of our ancestors, which still apply today. How do we enliven those in this space? So that 3-strand braid comes together into this sinuous form. You can see it most strongly in this landscape design. So you can see that water, which is an element associated with creation, we all come from water, is honored here. So right now, their stormwater management system consists of a big swale over here and occasional leaking into here. So there's some problems with snow melt and things. So we thought, okay, well, let's roll with that. Let's develop a riparian zone here that stretches all the way around the eastern side of the building, honors that feminine element of water. It sort of skews to the more feminine end of the spectrum, and is associated with creation and new beginnings and life, supporting life. So that's this end here, adjacent to the forest line. And then we thought, okay, so that's where teaching needs to happen, because our greatest teacher is the land. I talked about that earlier with the bentwood, the ephemeral bentwood structure that we teach in. And that's because our greatest teacher is the land. So that's what we see here, is these outdoor classrooms that transparently connect with indoor classrooms. Then we have the building itself. So the building honors those axial associations of the four cardinal directions, and it implies a connection to sky, to land, the direction of down, and the direction of center, which is our heart, the direction of balance. And we have this courtyard, which is planted with all our nice friends and relatives, the plant nation, so that when we look back at the truth of the past, we are somewhat buffered and encouraged and comforted by having all our relations around us. So that is the landscape plan, which really actually, we're working with Plant, Eric Claver at Plant and Terrence Radford at Trophic. And they're wonderful. Oh, I didn't mention Carol Phillips is working on this with us, Moriyama and Tashima, along with her whole team, which is fantastic. Masa, Emmanuel, and Dea and Jay. So anyway, they are wonderful to work with. We really do have a true partnership with them, and I'm really proud to say we're working together on this. So this is that courtyard element, where, as I said, we have these sort of screening friends and relatives that when you look through this glass back at Shingwak Hall, we are acknowledging the truth of that, but we have some support. I should also mention that this diagonal tracery that you see in all of our renderings represents the Tikanagan lacing. So does anybody know what a Tikanagan is? Anybody? Oh, nobody, okay. Tikanagan is really important to us because it represents how much we love our children and how we take care of them. So a Tikanagan is a cradle board that has a cloth attached to it, and the cloth gets laced up, and tucked into the cloth is all those nice soft mosses and everything fluffy that we can find to keep the baby happy and dry. And when we lace up the baby, then we can take the baby with us anywhere we go, because it really becomes very portable at that point. And so when we think about living our lives, our kids are always there too. So one of the sayings I hear from elders is children are our greatest teachers, right? And we really take that seriously. So this Tikanagan lacing is sort of a counterpoint to this former residential school and how we value our children. It also plays into the interior structure of the building. So usually when you see mass timber is done very rectilinear bays, very regularized, highly, a post and beam. So in this project, we are using the Tikanagan lacing as the organizing factor for the structure also. You'll see it in a little bit here. There we go. So you can see how that knits together the building. So this is the atrium space, and it's important to have our protector, our healer there, Makwa, so that we know that Makwa is there whenever we have to go out and encounter, the big shoulders of Shingwak Hall. It's important to integrate Indigenous perspectives into your work that are regionally appropriate and mutually beneficial. In this way, we avoid cultural appropriation. So cultural appropriation is sort of a bugaboo everybody's worried about. It's very simple actually to avoid. I will tell you all about it. So cultural appropriation is when dominant cultural entities benefit from taking ownership over sublimated culture's elements and expressions. So you can always tell very easily when something is culturally appropriative because you will notice decontextualization. An element is taken out of context and it's deployed higgledy-piggledy. So that's an example right there. This fashion show just threw together some Inuit stuff and maybe some planes. I don't know what that is. And like beadwork, kudos, threw it all at the wall and some of it stuck. And then they deployed this. You can tell also if the venue that is hosting this cultural expression is doing it for monetary gain, where no members of the culture are meaningfully involved. So if there is monetary gain going on, where no one from the culture is present, that is definitely appropriation. So these are some examples of people over the years who pretended to be Indigenous. This is coming up more and more. Academia tends to be a little bit vulnerable to this because academia is always seeking for Indigenous academics to share their knowledge, but the vetting process always isn't super great. So one thing to remember is nothing about us without us. I think that goes for any sublimated cultural group. So here we have Dawes Road Library. This is a public building. What we're aspiring to is to create environments where Indigenous activities and cultural production are both encouraged and celebrated. So one of the core spaces in this building is this roundhouse. So this is built on the principles of the Nui Itawigamig. Sorry to stumble over that. Nui Itawigamig. Oh my God, I've said it a million times. It's probably the problem. It means where we all come to dance together. So the Anishinaabe Roundhouse is a cultural architectural typology that's been used in pre-contact times and continues to be used for the same purposes today. And having one in a public institutional space is completely groundbreaking. You never see this. It allows us to do a lot of things that we can't do in a conventional space. And it allows us to use the actual room as a diagram for many of the teachings we want to share. In the center here, this is what we're calling the Clan Mother Zone. So this whole space is built on kind of the principles of the Longhouse. So the Longhouse, as you know, has multiple bays of, well, maybe you don't know, I don't know. Does anybody know anything about Longhouse? A few of you? Okay, great. I'm going to say a few words about it just because not too many of you raised your hand. So a Longhouse is a bentwood structure. It's used by Haudenosaunee. In fact, the word Haudenosaunee means people of the Longhouse. So they're named after their architecture. And inside of that huge bentwood structure, you have platforms for activity. Some are used for storing things, some are used for sleeping on, and right in the middle, that's sort of the shared zone where you do your day-to-day activities together around a hearth. Right in the middle of the roundhouse sits the clan mother. Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe both are matriarchal societies, so women call the shots in the home. And especially for Haudenosaunee, this is really important because clan mothers formed their core governance principles. So the clan mother's bay is super important. So we put one in there, right there. And that's where a lot of storytelling happens, even on the extra level. So you can see sort of that bay approach to organizing the space there. You can also see the platforms, which sort of hover over this performance atrium. And then we wrap the whole darn thing with a star blanket. So a star blanket has a meaning that we are calling the attention and support of our ancestors to recognize really good community work that's being done, which is what we anticipate to happen in this library. So that's what the blanket gesture is. This is the Dawes Road branch redevelopment, and this is sort of a more up-to-date render of that same space. You can see that public zone also leaks out into the street. So this is sort of our front porch gesture where people can just come use free Wi-Fi if they want. And it's inhabited by all our plant relatives again. And then up on the final floor, there's this beautiful space for knowledge sharing. It's got a sacred fire, it's got Indigenous plantings, and it's got a circle for meeting, and it's easily accessible by both the roundhouse and by an internal kitchen and multi-purpose zone run by the, I'm going to try to remember their name, SCFA, I think it's Social Finance and Development Hub. So they partnered with the library. They provide social and financial resources to community members. And so it's a wonderful partnership between a library entity and a social service provider. And so they're sharing this space. This is a view from the back, and you can just see that roof garden peeking out the tip of the roundhouse there, and you can see the blanket kind of wrapping in layers around this space. This is a very post-war residential neighborhood, and so we kind of wanted to break down the scale of this building in a really gentle way, so it wasn't like in your face. So it's sort of like little fragments of color and pretty little overlays and interesting fenestration. So it's not like overwhelming to the scale of what is really a very residential post-war environment. There's another view of it from the corner. So that star blanket gesture is centered on that clan mother and roundhouse bay to represent that everything emerges from there. I've just got one more project to talk about, and let's see where I am. Oh, 51 minutes, not so shabby. I'll go through this one fast. So, aspiring to architectural space and built environments where Indigenous emerging vendors and personnel can build their businesses, their capacity, their experience, and expertise. So, established vendors can earn an equitable share of fees and capital expenditures. So when we talk about mutual benefits, this is sort of what I'm talking about. When we deploy our project funds, make sure an equitable amount of them is going to the people you're trying to engage so that there is a mutual benefit. Centennial College here is one that we partnered on. Oh, did I mention Dawes Road? This was a partnership between Perkins and Will and Smoke Architecture. So this is Andrew Fontini and his whole team, Michael and Linda and a whole bunch of people have worked on this. So real pleasure to work with Perkins and Will on this. This one we have worked with Dialogue. So Craig kicked us off, Craig Applegath, who you saw there smudging with us, and next we worked with Juan Portuguese and Cohen and a bunch of wonderful people at Dialogue. So that was a pleasure too. And the whole project was built by Elliston. And they did such a fantastic job, I can tell you, that I had been working on the design and envisioning the spaces and like getting all the little details straight and materiality and all this and that. And then I walked in and it was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. And I was like, that's so rare. Usually you go in and you're like, darn, that little corner is askew and that little piece of finish, that's not right. I won't look at it. But the whole thing is just gorgeous. And I think it's because the whole team came together and got really excited about making something amazing. And it really is. There's some gestures in here you just don't see. So one, the whole cladding is meant to be highly accessible and friendly to anyone. Now, it's based on a little bit like inspired by Indigenous beadwork or quill work, little components coming together in geometric repeating patterns. But those repeating patterns are based on natural patterns we see all over the place, like fish scales, like the scales of a snake. And the whole gesture was meant to hearken back to the creek back here, which has been kind of forgotten by the campus. And so like that little creek back there, we just wanted to gesture back to it with the building so that it knew that it wasn't forgotten. So this whole thing is meant to be very gentle. And for anyone who comes, because this is a highly international student body who comes here, everybody shares the land, right? Everybody sees repeating geometric patterns in nature. So hopefully you can just see yourself in that facade. So yeah. Is my clicker dead again? There we go. The whole thing pivots on this really key expression, this what we call balanced center stone. So right here, we honor historical wampum. Wampum is a record of agreements that have been made, important meetings and points of consensus that have been reached between international bodies. So we put the thing by which they link arms, the this wampum pattern on here to represent a coming together, a heart-to-heart connection. Out of that heart-to-heart connection grows these 7 columns, which represent that wampum is for Haudenosaunee peoples, and then the 7 columns represent the Anishinaabeg teachings of the Mishomis, the sacred Mishomis teachings. And then we also got from knowledge carrier Joseph McQuabi, who has since passed on, the Nokmis teachings. So Mishomis means grandfather, and Nokmis means grandmother. And so Nokmis is for teachings that are how you retain integrity within yourself, and the Mishomis teachings are how you maintain integrity with your relationships with external other people and other things. So that's what those 7 columns represent. So I'll just say a little bit more about this. So this is the thing by which they link arms, the friendship belt. So you can see a heart-to-heart connection between 2 people of different cultures, different background, but their little hearts are there. We also wanted to have sort of a hearkening back to the cosmic realm. And so the sun sets on June 21st, which is summer solstice and Indigenous Peoples Day at a 305th azimuth, so 305-degree azimuth. When you come around the building and you're looking at the building from the direction of that setting sun on Indigenous Peoples Day, you can see this line form between these two figures. At other points of the day, when you're moving in other points on your path, you can't quite see that line clearly. And we wanted to say by doing that, sometimes we're on a journey and we don't see the heart-to-heart connection, but there is a point in time we will get there. So we're always seeking for that. So this is sort of what I was talking about. At a certain angle, you can see that line come together and connect those 2 figures. Our animal teachers that represent those 7 sacred teachings, you can see their footprints guiding the way up those 7 columns. And each one is also associated with a color. So I managed to get a rainbow on my building. So it's awesome. And yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot more to say about this one. Let's just see. Oh, yes. Oh, my God. I forgot all about Grandmother Moon. So Grandmother Moon, we have a series of Anishinaabe names that represent what we're doing out on the land during the different seasons of the year. We use a lunar calendar. Each of those moons has a name that reconnects us with our land-based activities. So we noticed this really significant shadow line cast by the existing building into the circular courtyard, which is an outdoor classroom. And so we thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if on the noonday sun, on every full moon day, cast its shadow on a line in the pavement that also had that Anishinaabe word for that moon. And so it works like a charm. Our landscape team did this with us, and there it is. So you can really see that shadow. The shadow line it's cloudy here, but it's there. Trust me. So this is a pavement, terraced seating pavement. So people can come out here and reground themselves. This is sort of the center umbilical connection to Shkagamakwe, Mother Earth, in this courtyard. And the college really insisted on having it. They're like, this is crucial. We need a place for people to come and recenter themselves. And so we thought, okay, if we're recentering, then what we need is a sense of reconnection. And that reconnection is with all those living systems that we depend on, all our friends and relatives. And so for Anishinaabeg, we understand this to be the 4 levels of creation. Haudenosaunee express it using the Thanksgiving address, which is a shout out to all the living systems that support us and are our friends and relatives. So here is all the under water and under soil creatures. This is all the creatures that go about on the land like us. Here's a few words for creatures of the air. So Migizi, that's eagle. And then here, this is the celestial realm, the 4th level creation. So Gizis, that's sun. And Debik Gizis, that's moon. And I think I only have one more slide here. Yeah, this is the center to the whole thing. This is that direction of balance or heartbeat or self. It knits the whole building together. All of these things that I've shown you actually culminate in this space. And it's, again, built on those roundhouse spatial configurations. So there's a connection to sky over here, an implied connection to downward, the direction of Earth, Mother Nature, Mother Earth. And this here, the direction of center or self, the direction where we see the drum. The four columns open gateways to the four directions, each of which have their own teachings. And the whole thing is clad in sort of a wigwam, bent wood kind of a structure. And I just want to have a shout out to the mill worker. I'm going to say his name here because he passed away too. So a bunch of people put their last best thoughts into this building. And the mill worker had this wonderful idea to do this woven looking basket thing. Let me see if I can remember his name. Elio Decarolis from Janelle. And so they figured out how to do that. So anyways, that's what I've got for you. Oh, this is all the books. So if you want to do your own research, these books you can rely on. They're primary sources. These are written by Indigenous people, and they're very good resources. So thanks so much.
Hey, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. And we have some time now for questions from our audience. So we're going to go around with the microphone here. So please just raise your hand and we'll come to you.
Thank you so much, Eladia. That was very inspiring and thoughtful and educational in a way that, you know, a lot of us don't know all the thinkings, all the history and, you know, all these meaningful things. That it was really nice to hear. I wanted to ask, this is a very simple question. I was thinking, you know, is there a list or is there a database somewhere that is starting to be created with all different, you know, Indigenous architects, designers, artists, like vendors, people that if we did want to include in any sort of project, is there some sort of database that's being developed?
So glad you asked that, because I am setting up a nonprofit organization called Avia, Amplify Indigenous Voices in Architecture, that is going to attempt to do that very thing. Because no, it doesn't really exist. We're going to have to build it. There is, if you contact the RIC and ask the question, they will give you their list of Indigenous practitioners in architecture, but that's kind of the best we've got right now. So when I said the feds want to spend 5% of every federal project on Indigenous procurement, that is rough, because whoever's landed with the Indigenous procurement plan has to build that from scratch every time. So it is really tough. Usually the first move that I would recommend is contact the local First Nations economic development branch, because they often have businesses that they can refer to you to from their lists. But no, there's no sort of clearinghouse. And so this nonprofit entity I am about to work to found that's one of the functions we're hoping to meet. Because architects need this info. We really do. And it just doesn't really exist in a central location.
I'm going to ask one more question while I still have a mic. Can you tell us a little bit about smudging?
Oh, sure. Well, normally we do that when a smudge was here, but just imagine a wonderful smell of sage and you're feeling very, very grounded. So we have a number of key plant spokesplants. So like diplomatic relations with plants, and a few of them have agreed to liaise with us more directly. So those include things like cedar, tobacco, sage, and sweetgrass. So all of those are used in smudge, but the most common one you'll see is sage. And so when we smudge, we are endeavoring to reconnect with our partnering life systems in the world. And so those plants have agreed to sort of help humans out because we are one of the few creatures who came last to the world. And so we're kind of a very dependent species. We're dependent on all the other species for our survival. And two, we kind of get lost in our own heads sometimes. So all the other critters in the world, they follow creator's law, they follow natural law. So when I say creator, it sort of means nature, means whatever you want it to mean, I suppose, but natural law, the thing that we're supposed to do. So all the other critters, you see them doing their jobs, right? Their natural jobs. Humans have the choice to pretend we don't have to follow natural law. And sometimes that can be good if we want to sort of, see the patterns of things, right? And sort of remove ourselves from natural law to be able to see, the beautiful patterns at play. But we do ascribe to natural law. We do have to follow those precepts. And so when we smudge, that's our plant relatives helping us to recenter ourselves into that context, into the jobs we need to do. So what elders have told me is we smudge our heads to think clearly, our ears to listen to everything that's being shared with us, our eyes so that we can see clearly and truthfully, our mouths so that we can speak honestly, our hearts so that we can truly feel our emotions, and anything else that we are having trouble with so that we can strengthen it. You take some sage and you light it with a match, and then you blow it out with your hand, and then you put it wherever you need it. No, you take the smoke and you sort of move it around yourself. Yeah. And then you sort of take that bowl and you pass it around the circle of everyone who's there. And you usually share a little bit about yourself as you're doing that. You have your introductions and who everyone is. And then you put the bowl over here because it's usually still smoldering, and it sort of gifts everyone with a gentle aroma for the first bits of the meeting. It's supposed to reground yourself so that you can hear what needs done next really clearly. So I do find it very helpful. In fact, usually what I would have done is smudge before a speaking event like this because it helps me immensely. So if I've been a little rough around the edges tonight, that might be why. And I do it before I design anything too, especially the difficult ones like Algoma there. He did a lot of smudging. So it does really help.
Hi, thanks. That was really fantastic. I think it's been maybe 8 or 10 years since I heard you present at the University of Manitoba.
Oh, yeah, that would be a ways back.
Probably at an atmosphere symposium or something. I don't know, where you came and spoke many times, but your career has really blossomed, if I can use that metaphor. And it's really great to see all the collaborations that you're doing. The work is super excellent. I had my first question changed as you were speaking about the smudge, which was such a brilliant, 3-word question. Tell us about smudge.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Sorry, I'm not as good at it. But my bigger question was going to be about meaning in architecture, and it's a little bit tricky because there's this whole modern movement, and I'm sure you encountered this in school.
I have encountered the modern movement. Actually.
Resistance to metaphor, resistance to analogy, meaning in architecture, right?
I ignore all that stuff.
I know, yes, and it's so I'm really so thrilled to see people who have the courage just to go for it, but there's something about that where the work. You can say, well, this represents, and I love the fact that the word representation is used so many times in your talk, but representation means different things in each instance, or almost. So you're having a representative role yourself, and then there's representation in the kind of visual, sometimes in a visual, abstract, figurative metaphor of work. But in the end, isn't it the ritual that is most important in terms of establishing the meaning? And do you find that you have to struggle, or that there's in conveying why things are being done, to get to the depth of the matter and not just to have people just say stop at the kind of iconic or visual symbolism that can be deployed.
I think I know what you're getting at. Architects are trained not to be representative, and we're trained not to be literal, and we're trained to be highly abstract. So design's only good if it's so abstracted that you can't see the thing anymore and it becomes form, right? So yes, I also struggled with that in my training until I spoke with Patrick Stewart, who's NISCA, and he practices in British Columbia. And he was doing his PhD research, and he was interviewing all of us Indigenous practitioners to see our take on this, right? And he listened to all of my architects speak. Yeah, we got to abstract things. Yeah, it can't be too literal. Yep, need to keep our metaphors highly, toned down. And he's like, okay, yeah, true. But at the same time, Indigenous peoples' aesthetics, material culture, our stories, our teachings are completely invisible in the built environment. They do not exist. What does exist is colonial environments, colonial teachings, colonial metaphors, colonial. So you take apart any Western precedent, you'll find all kinds of narrative and metaphor in that, loads. So he said, you know what? There's nothing wrong with showing representative art of our peoples because we simply haven't seen it. So it's time to accept that we do have a material culture. We do have an aesthetic. We do have specific teachings, and they have a place in the built environment. In fact, people respond to them if they're Indigenous or not Indigenous. And I'm like, that is a really powerful viewpoint. And it really helped me get over that hump of modernism. So yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good question.
Back here. Got it. Okay.
I mean, I think it's kind of related to the previous question, which I appreciate your answer. The short version of the question is, do you guys put up signs? The long version of the question is, we're all obviously super interested in the intricacies of kind of the way that you've represented Indigenous values in the architecture, and down to like, what does this image mean? What does this form mean? Does your firm, do you guys put any effort do you feel like it's important to put effort into putting up a sign to explain to people who potentially are not in this space what your gestures mean and what the intentions are? Maybe it's not like a sign, but maybe it's in a different way. Do you kind of interact with the people who work who go to school in Centennial College to tell them this is what your building means?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and one we always ask ourselves as we're doing our work. So I'm just going to go back to a slide here, because if my clicker hasn't died, come on, clicker, you could do it. There we go. So this one right here. So we are working with Sean Kinsella, who's director of the 8th Fire, best job description ever, I feel, with Centennial College. And that 8th Fire, I'll just note, is hearkening back to a sort of a prophecy or a narrative that we've told about our peoples coming together. So if we successfully do our work in this generation, which is the 7th generation, we will get to light the 8th fire, which is symbol of human survival. So we got to do good work in this generation. And what will help us do that is to go back along the path we came from and pick up things that were forgotten along the way. So that's the nature, that's this prophecy. So in order to do that, we have to care to go back along that pathway, and we have to care to try and pick up stuff that was forgotten, that has value, that we need to be able to light the 8th fire. So you can read a full description of that in the Mishomis book. So the bank of books that I showed you there by Edward Benton Benai. Anyways, we asked Sean, okay, so we want to represent the four levels of existence here. So the four levels of existence as understood by Anishinaabeg Nation and also referred to in the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. So how should we do that? Should we sort of have pictures of the different types of animals, the different critters there? Should we just leave it blank and let people infer? And he's like, you know what? You should just put the language on there. I'm like, okay, good. We can put the language and then we can put an English translation so people understand what it means. He's like, no, just put the language. I'm like, yeah, but people won't know what it means. He's like, yeah, but we're like right next door. The two doors that come out of this space are the two Indigenous people's space. They can just come through the door, see one of us and ask. And I'm like, okay, that's good. Yeah, that works. So this is meant to spur discussion. It's actually meant to incite curiosity, to convince people to ask questions and have conversations about it. So it's very deliberately left uninterpreted. That said, Centennial College also took a whole series of videos of me, which they promise are going to be linked up to a website that can be accessed by QR code. So it's me sort of like verbally saying all this stuff to whoever wanders through the building and scans a QR code with their phone. So that's the plan. But a lot of our knowledge systems are best shared verbally and orally, like what we're doing here today together. We are very careful about what we write down. Our view is that the oral tradition is much more reliable than the written tradition. This flies in the face of Western understanding. Western folks are like, well, write it down or it isn't real. And we're like, oof, careful of what's written down. You're not sure that's real. So it's like opposite. So anything you hear from an Indigenous person embedded with their communities and cultures, they are really careful to get that right. And furthermore, they're thinking about getting it right for you specifically on this date so that what they're sharing is useful to you. So they might know a whole crap load of other stuff, that they're not even mentioning. But this is what they think, okay, like we've listened to our hearts. This is what we need to say today. And so that oral tradition is really, really powerful. And so ideal scenario, you get this info direct from the source. Less good scenario, get it direct from a book written by a direct source. So yeah, I hope that answers. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. That's great. It's an important one, interpretive elements.
A lot of the projects you presented were placed in a site that had a lot of landscape and like water to be inspired from. Do you think that a project that speaks to the heritage and to Indigenous people would be appropriate in a site that's surrounded by like large commercial buildings? Mm-hmm. And if so, how would you approach a project?
Yes, well, this is a really great question because none of the projects I've done are actually surrounded by very much vegetation at all. Like this has some, right? Because it's a campus. But we had to sort of redevelop this whole area into a north garden of Indigenous plantings. And what we're always trying to do is reverse the default field of perception for urban environments where like you see this precious little plant community over here in a planter and that's its home and the rest is pavement and the default position is pavement. So we're always trying to do our best, it's hard, to reverse that so that the pavement just gets you there and the plant community is the default position. So it's really hard to do in urban environments, but you can kind of see that we've done our darndest to do it. Same with Dawes Road Library. So like in this rendering, this is really what we did is we surrounded all of the windows that look out into this courtyard as much as possible with planted areas, so Indigenous plantings. And then this center area here, that's just to be able to have a space to meet, and all around you are these plants. So that's what we always try to do is kind of reverse that field of perception. So you can see we kind of managed to do it. It kind of does look like a planted area. Before this was all just pavement. So yeah, you gotta like really try hard when you're working with disturbed environments. same here, like this isn't built yet, but the idea, and we keep pushing landscape to add more plants. We're like, couldn't this planter go all the way to the curb? No, we need sidewalk. Okay, well, how far can it go? And so like we're always sort of pushing how much plant can we get versus pavement. So this is another highly urban environment right now. This is all pavement. So we're really hoping to soften that up a bit. And I think it's really important for Shkagamakwe to be able to think. And when she can think, she can help us out, right? And so like we are kind of at sea, all of us. We're really vulnerable species. We're very dependent. As I said, we don't really follow natural law. We have the choice not to, or think we do. And so we get kind of lost, and we really need help to recenter ourselves and figure out, okay, what is even natural law for us anymore? And Shkagamakwe and all of her progeny is on board with us on that endeavor. They're like, yes, let's help the humans figure themselves out. But they can't do that if we don't give them space to help us out. So we really do need to create those regenerative environments to help ourselves out, if nothing else. So yeah, I don't know if that answers.
Time for one more question.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I have a question about the programming phase on the projects where you are able to join at the beginning.
Yep.
Are the architects open to your manipulating the program and the kind of space planning process?
Yes, it's always a series of gentle nudges so that you're not like, rethink this whole plan. We've got a whole other perspective here to integrate. It's sort of like, well, perhaps we could consider this. And then you sort of gently introduce environments. And if you're not the one introducing, all the better. If you can marshal other forces to say that for you, perfect. And furthermore, like I, as a designer, I have the teachings that have been gifted to me, but I don't know all the answers for every project. So really, I am also continually searching for what needs done to make a project go well and be a success. And so really the key thing is asking those questions of the people who are going to use the space, especially remembering to include the Indigenous voices who speak for that territory and getting them to say those things. Because even if I were to try and champion all of those good things, I don't really have a lot of authority, and nor should I. So really trying to get other people, their expertise, the people who are from that community, who know their neighborhood, who know their space, who know what they need. And even if it's just a little small community of like one household who's going to live in a house, like you're still doing that, right? You're still trying to gather that expertise and translate it into a physical manifestation of space. So yeah, baby steps, being gentle, being kind, trying not to be too pushy about things, but honestly sticking to your guns when it matters. So if you've heard something from somebody, we need to see this in the space, you stick to that. You're like, yes, this has been a clear direction from our participant group. We're going to maintain that despite all of the value engineering requirements, despite all of the, design aesthetics we want to bring in. Like that is a key project success factor. We are going to make sure that happens. So yeah.
Hey, so thank you very much. This is a really inspiring talk. We have one of our student members of our committee would like to just say a few thanks on behalf of the students. Serena.
Oh, thanks everyone for dealing with the heat. All of you who have stayed.
So thank you, Eladia, for taking the time to share your firm's works with us and just educating us on the methods of engaging and integrating diverse cultures and experiences to offer more accurate representation within our designs. So I particularly enjoyed hearing about the Dal Road Roundhouse and just seeing the various gestures to the traditional Anishinaabe roundhouse. And just with color, form, and visual and metaphorical representation, and just seeing how the building became a
would become a public space that just invites the culture and activities of Indigenous peoples. So thank you for bringing more clarity to the meaning of public and public engagement within public spaces.
So thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Thanks to the Department of Architectural Science staff, especially Bridget DeLima, Elaine Serrano, Houston Chi, Alex Bursono, and our two technicians, Ivan Skyba and Leo Reitman. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.